Have you ever heard the word donor fatigue? I'll tell you what, I actually hear it in almost every initial conversation with the board or staff. I hear it with donors. Donor fatigue, whether they our donors are tired, they give all the time. I even hear about donor fatigue in Ramadan, where they say, please ask the donors early in Ramadan, hit them in Ramadan. I hear this terminology and these words used, and then I hear, well, if you don't do that, then you'll have donor fatigue later. But I ask myself, does donor fatigue actually exist? If you Google it or you ask ChatGPT, you find lots of information about donor fatigue, but there isn't truly one specific definition. It's almost like it's this big catch-all phrase that summarizes when a donor stops giving or doesn't give anymore. Then fundraisers blame it on donor fatigue. I say to you all, this term donor fatigue needs to be reframed. It needs to be reframed as donor abuse. Because if you really understand what's happening, it's not a consequence. A donor not giving is not a consequence of the donor running out of money. A donor saying, sorry, I can't give you anymore, is a consequence of how we're asking, how we're engaging, and how we're interacting with the donor. And I'm going to back that up. Because it turns out that when you steward a donor well, when you solicit a donor well, when you cultivate a donor well, they give not only one time, but they'll give at least 3 years in a row. And the research says if they give 3 years in a row, because you did all those things well, they'll give 10 years. So in other words, if you don't abuse the donor, then you've got about 10 years of giving. But if you abuse the donor, then you are unlikely to get the donor to give again. And that's not donor fatigue. That's how we're asking. That's how we're interacting. That's how we're engaging with the donor. So paradigm shift. Shift your mindset from donor fatigue to donor abuse. Because donor abuse asks ourselves as fundraisers, as nonprofits, how are we creating a culture of philanthropy around our mission? How are we engaging our donors? How are we deepening trust? How are we fostering relationship? How are we ensuring they're experiencing the value of their gift? And if we do all these things right, then we're not committing donor abuse. And when we don't commit donor abuse, we actually ensure retention, we ensure better relationships, we actually can achieve sustainability, which is a word I heard for the first time in the nonprofit sector. I never heard sustainability in the for-profit sector. I hear about it in the nonprofit sector. And so in the nonprofit world, focus on avoiding donor abuse and delete donor fatigue. From an Islamic perspective, I ask myself, why do we all of a sudden think people who give and have given are out of money? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that when you give, He's going to give more. So for us to think that someone who's been giving is out of money and can't give again is counterintuitive to our own understanding of Islam and taking us away from tawakkul, tawheed, aqidah, and yaqeen in the ideas and the messages and the essence of Islam and what's in the Quran, which is Allah promises what He'll give far more when you give for Him. So this idea of donor fatigue doesn't work, not from an academic perspective, not from an Islamic perspective. What does work from both an Islamic perspective and from an academic perspective is donor abuse. Because donor abuse is when you interact with people without ihsan, when you're taking advantage of someone's kindness and expecting them to give without an understanding, without expecting them to perform due diligence, without expecting them to want or need to know that the Amanah of the money that they gave, the trust that the money that they gave us, that they entrusted us with as fundraisers, as nonprofits, that we used appropriately as an Amanah. Then this donor abuse occurs. So avoid donor abuse. And the upside is your retention rates go up. Your retention rates go up. The average nonprofit in the US, the retention rate is 45%. I don't know about you guys, but if I went home to my mom with an average report card, which is basically a C, I would be grounded. Like C's were basically F's in my house. So if you are thinking about your organization's retention rate, then think about at least a B, which is 70 to 80%. And if you're able to get to a B, then work to get an A, which is 90% or more. High performing nonprofits are 85 to 100% in terms of retention rate. So focus on your retention rate. Focus on the tactics that improve your retention rate. And if you can do that, you improve your sustainability. And I'm going to sort of end off with this. As a development director or an organizational leadership, you want to think about all of your marketing and fundraising activities to solve for three things. Number one, I want more contacts in the database. That means go out there and find people who've never heard of our mission and get them in the database. That KPI is subscribers. I need to drive subscribers up. Number two is acquisition. Acquisition is new first-time donors. Everything that I do needs to also contribute to new donors in the database, new supporters in the database. And then number three is retention. Retention is how many subscribers am I retaining? How many donors am I retaining? That contributes to the retention rate. And if my retention rate is north of 60 or 70 or 80%, I'm in the B range. And if I'm in the B range, I'm building sustainability. And if you're a board member on this call or a leader, the performance of your development department and your development activities are based on these three KPIs. And in the long run, you use the compound annual growth rate. These are your North Stars as a board to know if you're building sustainability, if you're building true sustainable growth over the long run. And that's what impact is about. That's what growing your mission is about. Thank you all so much for being on the show today. Let's all go out there and let's do the things that move us away from donor abuse. Let's delete this idea of donor fatigue. Let's understand what are the actions and decisions that we're making that make the world a better place, that eliminate donor abuse and actually help people find joy in engaging with philanthropy. Thank you very much for being on the show today. Assalamu alaikum.